You need to hear this if you're a fan of true self-reliance. Before we get technical, let me slow you down for a moment. If you've ever stepped into an old barn and caught that unmistakable mix of dust, oil and age, you've already brushed against a forgotten survival system. During the 1930s and throughout World War II, failure wasn't hypothetical. Rail lines were rationed, fuel was prioritized for the front, and imported food sources were unreliable at best. Families at home lived with the understanding that if something broke, it might not be replaced for years. Survival depended on tools that worked without electricity, without spare parts, and without outside help. Today, I want to walk you through one of the most overlooked pieces of that system, a device so common it faded into the background once power became cheap. But before we dive in, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Yet even now, it outperforms modern gear in the one category that matters most when everything else collapses: absolute independence. The machine in question is the hand-cranked grain mill, often paired with a simple fanning mechanism and bolted to a bench, a post, or a feed bin. Most people walk right past these mills because they look crude, rusted, or outdated. That reaction is a mistake. By the time World War II began, these mills represented generations of refinement. Cast iron frames absorb vibration. Hardened steel burrs were shaped for efficiency, not speed. Adjustable grind settings allowed a single tool to serve multiple purposes. Nothing about them was accidental, and nothing about them depended on fragile systems. They were engineered during a period when manufacturers assumed their products would be pushed hard, repaired by hand, and inherited by the next generation. Depression-era and wartime production demanded reliability above all else. Materials were scarce, and factories could not afford failure rates. Grain mills from this era were built with tight tolerances that still allowed function when dirty, cold, or slightly misaligned. There were no electric motors to burn out and no belts to snap under load. Every moving part could be understood by touch alone. In a survival context, this matters more than convenience. When a machine can be fully disassembled, repaired and reassembled without specialized tools, it stops being equipment and becomes infrastructure. During the war, whole grain was one of the safest forms of food storage available. It resisted spoilage, insects and moisture far better than flour. But whole grain was useless unless it could be processed daily. The hand-crank mill solved this quietly and reliably. Families adjusted grind sizes depending on need, producing coarse meal for porridge, cracked grain for animals, or fine flour for bread. When rations tightened, people extended calories by grinding dried peas, beans, acorns, and even roasted roots. This wasn't experimentation or theory. It was routine practice carried out across rural America and much of Europe. If you're searching barns, estate sales, or rural scrap piles, weight is the first indicator. A genuine 1930s or World War II-era mill feels heavier than it looks. Cast iron should sound dull when tapped, not thin or hollow. The adjustment screw should turn smoothly, even if it's a bit stiff from age. Burr plates should show even wear patterns, not cracks or chips. Avoid lightweight aluminum reproductions. Those were never designed for sustained use and will fail when pushed. Original mills were expected to run for hours at a time, day after day, without complaint. Restoration is where, honestly, many people make irreversible mistakes. Sandblasting burr plates or polishing contact surfaces destroys the cutting geometry that actually makes these mills effective. Historically, maintenance was simple and careful. Rusted parts were soaked in mild acid solutions, brushed gently with brass, neutralized, and then dried thoroughly. Burrs were never sharpened aggressively, not at all. Instead, dry grain was run through the mill to naturally polish contact surfaces back into working alignment. External bearings received small amounts of food-safe oil, and internal components were left dry. This approach is, well, exactly why so many of these machines still function nearly a century later. In a long-term disruption, owning stored grain without a mill is, in effect, owning locked calories. One adult can grind enough flour for daily bread in under 15 minutes with a properly adjusted hand mill. That efficiency mattered during the war, and honestly, it matters now. Pair a mill with sealed grain storage and a simple wood-fired oven, and you've recreated a complete 1930s food system that operates without fuel deliveries or electrical grids. Even today, this setup outperforms generators once fuel runs dry. The real lesson here isn't nostalgia. It's design philosophy. These tools assumed failure elsewhere and compensated for it. They were meant to be understood, maintained, and trusted. In survival terms, that's honestly priceless. When you find one of these mills buried in a barn corner, you're not finding junk. You're finding a solution that already proved itself under wartime conditions harsher than most people will ever face. If this kind of deep, practical history matters to you, make sure you're subscribed to Iron Will Survival. Share this with someone who thinks preparedness started with lithium batteries. The past solved more problems than we give it credit for, and here we're committed to preserving that knowledge before it disappears again.